What few can see can become your greatest trap. Often heightened perception can give the impression that you are ahead of the game, but in reality it can isolate you and ultimately destroy you. Today, I'm going to show you how this ability can be both a blessing and a curse. Niccolò Machiavelli, throughout his work, teaches that keen vision can be a powerful tool for control. But this same ability, if not well understood, becomes a trap. It promotes a constant cycle of alertness, and instead of helping, it begins to generate paranoia and loneliness. The question that lingers is, why does this capability, which seems so advantageous, turn into a source of destruction? What we call differentiated perception is often shrouded in fog. When you begin to notice subtle behaviors that others ignore, it can cause a divide. Empathy decreases and distance increases. You become the observer in a room full of people. At the same time, you try to protect yourself, and in that impulse you may end up isolating yourself, depriving yourself of meaningful connections. This not only diminishes your emotional value, it also reflects on your professional and personal relationships. And so you wonder, how does this skill, which should empower, lead to loneliness? This power play can provide a false sense of control, while in reality, you find yourself trapped in an emotional labyrinth. What should be a privileged view transforms into constant distrust and relational fatigue. What can we do to reverse this cycle? What happens when this ability is unchecked? The answers to these questions will reveal the depth of this intriguing topic. So, before we continue, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell, only if you really enjoy what I do here. I'm preparing a series of videos specifically to guide you on your journey of self-discovery and personal growth. With that done, let's move on. The differentiated perception we discussed isn't just a cloak of armor you can use to your advantage. It can also be a heavy blessing. When you start noticing behaviors that others overlook, your keen vision has the potential to isolate you. It's this fine line between perception and vulnerability that we need to explore as we dive into the Machiavellian perspective on perception. Machiavelli, in his most famous work, reveals that the ability to understand and manipulate human behavior is a source of power. However, this skill can become a burden that weighs heavily on those who possess it. Constant observation creates a tense atmosphere in social interactions. Power plays are never far away, and this can make you feel like you need to protect yourself at all costs. Distrust appears in small gestures, and without realizing it, you withdraw out of sheer exhaustion. Imagine this in practice. Someone who always wonders if they are being deceived, thoughts that begin to consume their mind, turning social interactions into a minefield where small mistakes can trigger huge misunderstandings. Around this person, the environment that could be welcoming becomes hostile. This constant anticipation of betrayal generates an ongoing cycle of alertness, where the only way to protect yourself is to remain vigilant. But this vigilance ends up creating emotional distances. The question to ponder is, how can we find a healthy balance between perception and vulnerability that does not lead us to isolation? And what happens when this ability to see becomes a curse? At this moment, these deep questions may seem unanswered, but they are crucial for understanding the complexities of the dynamics that shape our relationships. As you can note, this combination of perception and vulnerability is a complex path. It's not uncommon for observers to become prisoners of their own vision. But what really happens when you decide to let go of this constant vigilance? This discussion will lead us to an intriguing revelation. There is an exit in this emotional labyrinth. What would the answer be to these questions that can free an observer trapped in a web of distrust? A man looks around him. The atmosphere, filled with laughter and cheerful conversations, seems to vibrate with life, but he feels distant. In fact, something has him trapped. Despite the expressions of joy, his gaze fixates on subtleties, a furtive exchange of glances, a quick gesture of disdain. His heart tightens, a clear sign that he sees the dishonesty disguised under layers of cordiality. The silence that prevails in his mind seems to be his only friend, but loneliness begins to crush him, bringing an immense weight. This internal struggle between what is seen and what is real reveals a dark truth about the duality of perception. The ability to read others, to pick up on what many ignore, can be an admirable skill. However, when this perception transforms into a constant cycle of distrust and vigilance, people start to distance themselves. They don't understand, they can't connect. What should be a common bond turns into an abyss. Throughout human history, Niccolò Machiavelli warned us about the ambiguous nature of perception. Understanding human behavior is power, but that power can turn into an overwhelming burden. By looking at the world through the lens of distrust, the observer risks becoming a hostage not only of their own observations, but also of their emotional fatigue. It's a vicious cycle where the protection you seek turns into loneliness. Facing this dilemma, a question arises. How can we balance this keen perception with the necessary vulnerability to maintain meaningful relationships? And when does this ability, which could serve as an advantage, become a factor of isolation? These questions don't have easy answers, but they are crucial for unraveling the complexity of the social dynamics that shape our interactions. Now, consider your own surroundings. Have you ever found yourself in a room full of people but felt completely alone? This is a question many face. What can we learn from this? The answer may be just a step away from a new way to connect. So how can you better navigate between perception and connection without losing your way? Differentiated perception can be a treacherous path. When you see what others do not, the feeling of control and superiority can quickly turn into deep isolation. Thus, hypervigilance, instead of bringing safety, can become an emotional trap. This is what we will explore now. Niccolò Machiavelli warns us about the power of observation. He teaches that understanding the nuances of human behavior is a form of control. However, this ability, when not properly managed, can generate a cycle of distrust and loneliness. What should be an advantage turns into a constant source of pressure in relationships. The question remains, how does this admirable skill transform into an explosive mix of distrust and emotional exhaustion? As your keen perception intensifies, you begin to identify small behaviors that others simply overlook. This diminishes your empathy and increases emotional weariness, creating a distance that feels undesirable. What could be an approach turns into an emotional minefield. With each suspicious glance exchanged, each gesture considered ambiguous, loneliness becomes more palpable. Have you ever thought that by becoming the constant observer in a crowded space, you might end up losing significant connections? There is a high social cost to being the one who sees too much, and paradoxically, those who often see more frequently end up feeling more alone. But that's not the worst of it. What happens when this hypervigilance starts to affect not just one, but all aspects of your life? What kind of pattern forms in this relentless cycle? Now, I invite you to reflect. How can this ability to see the hidden be used in a way that doesn't cause you to lose touch with those around you? Where is the line between perceiving and isolating? In the next few minutes, we will delve deeper into this question, revealing how to manage this perception without letting it dominate your relationships. Are you ready? Sometimes having a perspective that goes beyond what others see can turn into a trap. Heightened perception, instead of being an advantage, can become a burden when you start noticing the subtle and disguised behaviors around you. The vulnerability that comes with this ability leads us to a crucial question. How do we manage perception without falling into loneliness? Amid this reflection, we can tap into the teachings of Niccolò Machiavelli, who reminds us that the ability to see the hidden truth in others is also a powerful tool for control. What made Machiavelli a remarkable thinker was his sharp understanding of human behavior and how it relates to power. He explained that when we observe too much, we can fall into a cycle of distrust and limited freedom, becoming prisoners of our own fears. This dynamic is often overlooked, and the ability to perceive nuances turns into a double-edged sword. You either develop healthy empathy or you rely on a distrust that consumes your interactions. In this video, we're going to explore how you can harness perception in your favor without letting it lead to isolation. Imagine a practical protocol that can help you regain control. Start with the practice of distant observation, maintaining a critical eye without getting lost in conclusions. Write down your perceptions to organize your thoughts and avoid the trap of generalization. Next, confront your fears by identifying and questioning the small insecurities that arise. Finally, cultivate trusting relationships in small groups where you can share your observations without fear of judgment. With these steps, you can transform your ability to perceive into a force that connects rather than isolates. But how does this process impact not only you, but also those around you? This response shapes what's to come. After all, how can we find that balance, preventing perception from becoming a weight that distances us from others? Where is the line between perceiving and isolating? This is what we will delve into next. The ability to notice nuances that most overlook may seem like an advantage, but as we've discussed, this perception can quickly turn into a heavy burden, leading to distrust and isolation. As we now explore the social impact of heightened observation, we realize that the way we relate to others can be profoundly affected. Machiavelli, in his strategies on power and control, suggests that the ability to understand human behavior is crucial for mastering social dynamics. However, this same skill, if not balanced, can create a barrier between you and others. When someone notices details that others ignore, their sense of empathy tends to diminish. You find yourself in constant vigilance, observing gestures, glances, and words, while trying to protect yourself from possible betrayals. It turns out that this state of alertness not only drains your emotional energy, but also creates a domino effect in your interactions. Picture this. You're in a meeting with colleagues, picking up on the micro-reactions others exhibit, the exchanged glances, the dismissive gestures. What could be a space for collaboration and support transforms into a tense battleground where distrust silently settles in. This is not just an isolated experience, it reverberates in your family life, friendships, and even in more distant relationships. The consequence is a bitter loneliness, where emotional closeness is sacrificed for the desire for control and security. What should be a beneficial correlation between observation and connection morphs into a disconnection felt not only by you, but also by those around you. The doubts and distrust born from your heightened perception can leave you and others in a state of confusion and insecurity, a cycle that's hard to escape. So what can we do to mitigate this social impact? What strategies can help restore meaningful connections without relinquishing the ability to perceive? These are crucial questions. Let's reflect. How can you balance heightened perception with the need to open up to relationships? This duality is essential to ensure that the ability meant to strengthen your social life doesn't end up destroying it. How do we find that delicate balance between perceiving and connecting? This question leads us to our next line of inquiry. The heightened perception that many believe to be a gift can quickly become an unbearable weight. You find yourself in a casual setting, surrounded by friends, yet you feel like a mere spectator, isolated in your own mind. This dilemma between observing and participating is the painful beginning we will discuss now. It's time to close the loop. What have we learned about differentiated perception and its dangers? Your sensitivity is not a weakness. It can be a powerful weapon when wielded correctly. Recognizing behavioral patterns that others miss can become a double burden. Machiavelli points out that such a skill, when misunderstood, transforms into a cycle of constant vigilance and legitimizes distrust. This differentiated perspective might lead you to believe you're making better decisions, when in reality, it can simply be an emotional trap that results in isolation. Think about it. How can this sharp eye turn into a minefield in your personal relationships? Often, you find yourself enslaved by your own vigilance, creating an atmosphere filled with tension and emotional fatigue, where closeness is sacrificed for the sake of control. This internal struggle is exhausting, and the question you must confront is, how can we achieve a healthy balance between perception and vulnerability that doesn't lead us to isolation? If you often feel like an outsider, as an observer, it's vital to remember that you're not alone on this journey. The answer to dealing with this perception and transforming vulnerability into meaningful connection is closer than you think. Recognizing that this skill, borrowed from Machiavelli, shouldn't be a personal battle but rather a tool for inclusion and understanding, is the key to breaking this dark cycle. So, how can we turn a sensitivity that drives us apart into a differentiator that unites us? This is the critical point that calls for reflection. What steps can you take so that this perception doesn't become a burden, but rather a bridge to strengthen your interactions? This is the question we'll explore now. What should be a gift turns into a deadly trap, becoming a heavy burden of loneliness and distrust. When we look at the relationship between differentiated perception and the emotional traps that arise, we see that the ability to understand what few can grasp can isolate rather than connect. This is a central theme in the work of Niccolò Machiavelli. He teaches us that understanding and manipulating human behavior is a tremendous power, but it also carries risks, especially when this ability leads to a cycle of distrust. The question is, why does this skill, which presents itself as an advantage, destroy human connection? Machiavelli provokes us to reflect on the fine line between control and isolation, between observation and participation. It's important to ask, how can we prevent this keen eye from trapping us in a web of solitude? As we continue this discussion, it's crucial to recognize that perception, when poorly managed, can close doors. It helps diminish empathy and heightens the sense of constant alert. Have you ever thought that the more you become the observer, the further you drift from meaningful relationships? The observer not only notices details that others overlook, but also finds themselves trapped in a cycle of doubt, where normality in relationships turns into distrust. This process can initiate a weariness in the emotional and social interactions, creating a tense atmosphere. Imagine how difficult it is to open up to someone when you're already programmed to look for hidden betrayal. The pressing question now is, how can we reverse this trend and manage this ability so that it doesn't push us away from others, but rather connects us? Have you ever found yourself in a crowd feeling completely alone? This reality is more common than you might think, and in truth, it can happen to anyone. So how can we transform this heightened perception from a burden into a skill that benefits our relationships? What can you do to open that door that seems closed? This reflection leads us to understand that true transformation occurs when we choose to act from a place of vulnerability rather than distrust. As we explore the interplay between what we perceive and how we relate to others, we begin to uncover a path that can change our reality. How can we find that healthy balance between perception and vulnerability?